By now, you guys have already heard about the filter that Flaco, Rojo, and Gunner just released with regard to this whole state-federal conflict and some of the relevant facts that continue to play out between both the state and federal factions. This past week, A Convict's Perspective and Gunner's Collective both ran segments on a filter that they acquired, and they actually did an amazing job not only breaking it down, but also by giving you guys their perspectives on it. These guys have all been around and have a firm understanding of what's involved, and for that I commend them all. However, now that you've had a chance to digest what they have put out, you're going to hear another side of this from me, from my perspective, because I was not only there, I was part of the organization, I've been to the shoe, and I was directly involved in some of the things that were mentioned, i.e. the door policy, stripping Carlitos and appointing Mono from Oakland to fill the RC position, the appointment of DC as overall authority that had clear stipulations, the dissemination of Skip and Corny's phone calls, and I was present when the guardianship of the O was passed over to DC, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is this. Aside from the filter that they broke down, I'm going to be breaking down another filter that is basically a response to the truth filter coming from the state. Note, this is not the same filter that they broke down on their channels. This is something entirely different that is an exclusive release that you're only going to find right here on Paradigm Media News. Instead of getting into both of these filters separately, I'm just going to break everything down collectively in concert since a lot of the information is repetitive. Now let me make something inherently clear. I have no dog in this fight. I don't care who wins this battle either way. My only objective here is to continue giving you guys, the viewers, this type of content and to also ensure that those who continue to glorify this lifestyle see firsthand the type of treachery and cutthroat politics that continue to be pushed. Although I might sound like I'm showing favoritism toward the federal branch, this isn't the case. Unfortunately, they're the ones who have the backing of the NF Constitution, and they're the ones who are playing by the rules. I'm simply stating the facts and guiding you through the politics that these cats are all pushing. This so-called state retort is nothing more than a haphazard attempt at manipulating the facts and a feeble attempt at trying to cast doubt on the veracity of the truth. They definitely get an A+ for responding in terms of their best legal interpretation, but unfortunately, this fell well short of addressing the pertinent issues and the issues in which they clearly deflected. This state retort starts out all wrong from the very beginning by stating that the intended purpose is to 1. Abreast C's and the feds of Corny and Skip's past indictment and decision making, and 2. They're seeking a response from the C's and the feds to work together hand in hand with the state, excluding Skip and Corny. This is ridiculous. Either these guys are a lot more fickle-minded than I thought they were, or they're just a lot less intelligent than what they get credit for, because nobody in the feds are going to be receptive to this, period. If they think they're going to make anybody abreast of Skip and Corny's past actions with regards to their decision making, then they're wasting their time, because they're not going to win over any votes on this one. And secondly, they must not have understood the clear and concise position the federal faction has already taken on Corny and Skip's standings when they suggested that the mere suggestion of impeaching either one of these two brothers was considered a treasonous action in itself. The state is now suggesting that they reach some kind of consensus by working hand in hand, excluding both Corny and Skip. They further contend that the timeline in the truth filter's statement of facts is not completely accurate, but they fail to state what these inaccuracies are. The state further claims that it is their intention to bridge the gap by diffusing the hostilities, and that they would rather reunify than to continue on with this rift. This is absurd by their own claims. Are they really not of sound mind or intelligent enough to figure out that their continued insistence of putting Corny and Skip in a negative light, and by now suggesting that they be excluded from the fold, will not only infuriate the federal branch even more than they already are, but it will also create bigger waves than they already have. This is not the type of dialogue you use if you're trying to diffuse any conflict. The state then goes on to lay out two obvious courses that the O is headed towards. 1. A war that they're trying to imply is being perpetrated at the direction of Corny and Skip, and 2, that the state federal factions come together and do what's in the best interest of the O. Unfortunately, the state is not acknowledging their role in this rift and have obviously failed to see that the O has already embarked on one of these courses. They attribute the war to Corny and Skip as if they are the faces of some type of Fed-led agenda. This is simply not true. What they fail to acknowledge is that the IC, the Inner Council, and the GC, General Council, were also indicted with the 3 high offices, the 3 generals, and that collectively they made decisions as a counseling body. This is backed by NF law, and NF law clearly states that major decisions affecting the O as a whole, whether leadership is incommunicado or not, will be made by the IC or GC, and that 3/4 majority vote prevails. Like I said before in the NF insurrection and in the truth filter, what the Constitution is silent on is what happens when the IC or GC are also taken out of HQ along with the 3 high offices. It sheds no light on this, as no one seemed to foresee this as a real circumstance. But even in light of the absence of direction, one can still draw an inference from what is still on the face, that the IC or GC will hold vote on major decisions that affect the body of the O, and that 3/4 majority rule. So in layman's terms, it still stipulates that these bodies will be the only bodies that will vote on major decisions. So in other words, the IC or GC were the only bodies vested with the authority to make decisions in these types of situations. This on its face alone obliterates the state's argument when they claim that DC was well within his right to make whatever decisions he felt were in the best interest of the O. This is simply not true. DC is not given carte blanche to do as he sees fit based on his interpretation of what's in the best interest of the O. I'm surprised that these brothers would give such a loose-knit interpretation of the Constitution when they themselves are supposed to be self-appointed, self-elected leaders of the O. If this were true, then the O would definitely be on another collision course to suffer some of the same consequential effects that it suffered decades ago when the rift developed between Sosa and the Vasquez factions. This is what the feds alluded to in the truth filter when they said that Chuco and Conejo were attempting to use DC's name and legacy to legitimize and justify their self-imposed state agenda. No one single familiano is entrusted with this type of supreme authority, and this has been well known and well established since Babo Sosa was appointed as a supreme general. This is why the NF adopted and created the MESA and these other counseling bodies that would later follow. Next, the state goes into a long drawn out narrative about the definition of how they define the state of being incommunicado and how they allegedly concluded that the former leadership in the federal system was officially incommunicado even by their own standards. This was nothing more than a bunch of meritless talking points that really only established that the state's label or meaning of incommunicado was only claimed after it seemed to benefit their agenda. So the state claims that at some point they officially deemed the Fed leadership incommunicado after a 2-year hiatus of not hearing from them, but in the same breath they go on to say that all attempts at ironing out any disagreements with Skip and Corny have failed due to their unwillingness to compromise. So which is it? They can't have it both ways. From their own claims, it's obvious that there seemed to be plenty of contact, but according to what they go on to say, since no ground was being made insofar as a meeting of the minds, now they are being deemed incommunicado. This holds no water, and here's why. Proof that consistent contact between the state and Fed factions has long been proven in the form of phone conversations, visiting recordings, and by the state's own admission. Several calls that Paradigm Media News released between Skip and Peggy, Corny and Coco, Pinky and Carol, and other female associates all alluded to the ongoing contact between the state and federal factions. Carol confirmed this to Pinky, Peggy confirmed this to Skip, Coco confirmed this to Corny, and other female associates confirmed this as well. All within the time frame that the state claimed that there was no communication with the leaders in ADX. Note how the state puts forth an underhanded argument about there being no contact, but then try to cloak the truth by emphasizing that no secure line to ADX was established. What does someone do when they attempt to shroud the truth? They become a chameleon and try to camouflage themselves. They emphasize secure line because this statement has hidden connotations in it. They're trying to imply that secure means impenetrable. That's their definition, but that's not how the Constitution defines it. Truth be told, there was multiple lines of communication open as both Skip and Corny were consistently reaching out. The problem with that is they weren't talking the state's language, so that's when the claims of Incommunicado began getting lodged. Next, the state addresses the cease to end hostilities and makes yet another baseless claim that the federal faction has communicated taking an adverse position against any truce with the MA. This is simply not true, and the state doubles down on this issue again. This is a classic case of propagating this issue for the purpose of gaining both political and internal backing. Everyone knows that the cease to end hostilities is not only a hotbed issue with a lot riding on it, but it is also a sensitive issue that has the potential to either create a lot of backing or a lot of opposition. The state is attempting to use this to their advantage by rallying the troops and all those who support this agreement by suggesting that the federal branch is in opposition to this agreement. What better way than to garner strong political backing than by separating the federal faction and by propagating the false assertion that they oppose something this positive that directly impacts the entire state branch of the NF and their Norteño following. Furthermore, with all the talk and speculation about the state being backed by the MA and the Sureño following, this just casts the federal branch further out and isolates them in the political arena that has become a hotbed for negative agendas. Foremost, the state makes the assertion that the former leaders in the feds were the actual architects and engineers of modifying the door policy, and this is said almost like none of them were in the loop. That's not the case. I can tell you that without any doubt because I was there and I was personally involved in these discussions. And I can also tell you that both DC and Conejo were also both deeply involved in those discussions as well. But either way, no matter how they want to cut it, slice it, or dice it, the door policy was not a portal or an ingress to be used for any other extension or purpose as the state claims. They used this past door policy to justify initiating their own peace talks that led to the cease to end hostilities agreement between themselves and the MA. This is dirty politicking. The door policy was agreed to and established for a specified purpose, nothing more, nothing less. Both the NF leadership and the MA leadership at the time felt like it was pointless taking a chance at getting killed by the gun towers for what usually only involved a minute or two of fist fighting. That was the extent of it. Because of that, the policy was modified to a stand your ground approach, and that's all it was. This wasn't any prelude to a peace accord almost 12 years later. The war remained fully intact and discussions going beyond the scope of the door policy never transcended. But regardless of this argument either way, the federal faction has never stated taking an adverse position against the cease to end hostilities agreement that the state faction brokered with the MA. Making these types of unsubstantiated claims is only further evidence that the state's assertions are questionable and that their claims can't be trusted. In fact, let the record reflect that the federal branch is fully supportive of the cease to end hostilities and that it had far-reaching positive effects for the raza. Without the brokering of this agreement, a lot of the progress that the O has been able to achieve these last few years would never have been possible. So again, they commend all those who either had a hand in establishing this agreement or those who had the mental fortitude to effectuate it. The next issue that the state addressed were personal attacks that they themselves made towards both Skip and Corny. They implied that Skip and Corny actually could have been deemed no good a few years ago, and this was said as if they were somehow doing these brothers a favor by not following through with it. This is clearly nothing more than both Conejo and Chuco's egos bleeding out and coming to life on paper. Show 10 reputable C's who share these same views. I say that they can't produce them. Not any of these new Cs who were just recently recruited by them and who continue to remain under this pseudo-inspired spell that they've been kept under, but instead some of the Cs who have been with the organization for over 10 years. A C who is loyal to La Señora de la Nuestra Familia. To even imply something like this about two highly respectable and reputable Cs like Corny and Skip is ill-advised, and these guys must have known that this isn't the type of verbiage that's going to lead to any resolutions. Skip and Corny epitomize what it means to be a loyal and dedicated member of the Familia. Did the state really fail to recognize this after reading the truth filter, or are they really under the ridiculous presumption that this type of negative denigration will help them achieve any type of equanimity with the federal faction? I don't understand their thinking or their true objective here, but this state retort doesn't seem like it was well thought out, or that its true intended purpose is to resolve any of the issues at hand. Again, this just sounds more like an airing out of personal feelings and personal gripes by both Conejo and Chuco. Throughout the entire body of this narrative, they complain and lodge complaint after complaint about the way that Corny and Skip have allegedly created an atmosphere of mistrust and hostility, but yet, this is exactly what they're also doing. Whether the state is in agreement with Corny and Skip's actions or not, they don't have the authority or power to impeach, deem, or remove them from their elected positions. So, to imply what they have suggested, or to address these issues in the form of a blanket filter to all Cs is in essence nothing more than a way for them to spread false and slanderous propaganda. This in itself could have been the basis for a charge of treason, as it's never been a customary practice to criticize or critique those who are considered to be elders for the way that they have elected to lead the O. The state next contends that they are in a much stronger place now, that the organization has become much more productive, and that they are in a better position to run California than the Fed faction. Is this more about personal preference and personal opinion now? Or is this more about following the rule of NF law and what the Constitution has already established? For the sake of argument, even if this were true, by their own argument, under what section of the NF Constitution does it stipulate that there's time constraints for being incommunicado? In other words, even though it's been many years later, where does the Constitution provide relief or justification for not relinquishing the O back to the rightfully elected and appointed leadership once contact has been fully reestablished? The transfer of guardianship is done only on an interim basis, period. So personal preference or personal opinion with regard to who's in a better position does not trump NF law. If said crisis lasted for 1 year or 5 years, it doesn't matter. The protocol and contingencies don't change. What justifies making a temporary transfer of guardianship on an interim basis a permanent delegation of power? There is nothing in the Constitution that justifies DC's position for refusing to formally transfer that delegation of power back. Technically, I should say Conejo and Chuco agreeing to transfer this power back, because from what I know about DC, it's not him who's refusing to transfer this power back, it's Chuco and Conejo. Right now, Conejo is in the throes of a serious fight for his own standings. For him, it's either sink or swim. There's no other alternatives. That's why I believe he's being as savvy and as cunning as he possibly can right now. He can't afford to let up on the pressure, otherwise he's gonna get eaten up. It's as simple as that. At first, I couldn't understand why he was going at Corny and Skip's throat so hard. But as more and more of this information continued to come out, I understood it. They're going right at his throat, so it makes sense. You know, I was watching Gunner and Flacco spill again, and I continue to stand behind what I said in regards to these brothers having a firm perspective on what's at stake here. But there were a couple things that were said that I have a difference of opinion about. One of the issues that I feel differently about is what was said in regards to Chuco and the state being creditworthy for having the ability to acquire their mainline status back. I don't believe that Chuco or any of the C's in the state branch deserve any of the credit for getting back out to the mainlines. This wasn't nothing any of them were personally involved in, and it's not like they actually did anything that directly contributed to the administration's change of policy. That credit goes solely to Todd Ashker and Danny Troxel, as these are the ones who drafted up the class action suit that changed everything. Corny and all the other C's could have still been in the state and the results would have been the same. They would have all got released the same way. The only thing Chuco did with regard to all that was to allow himself to be used as one of the faces of those who became known as the representatives of the inmates from different geographical locations in California. And although some might argue that the hunger strikes helped accomplish this objective, that's not quite true either. Once the suit prevailed, the hunger strikes just succeeded in expediting the process that was already coming to fruition. So it's my opinion that they shouldn't be credited with getting back out to the main lines, or that they effectuated some type of landmark decision in getting back out there. The one thing that Flacco and Gunner pointed out that I also agree with is their observation about how the state's first filter, the one that triggered the truth filter, was very poorly put together and how it lacked any real points of contention. A lot of accusations were made by the state, but what was lacking was any real detail or any real specific examples of how these accusations were substantiated. The federal faction came with hard facts, dates, references, and incidents of things that transpired over the years. When you're weighing out the veracity of these allegations, you've got to ask yourself why these things are lacking. Was there something on TV that they wanted to watch or something? It's almost as if the state attempted to use a writ of habeas corpus as a template to map out a response, refuting the claims that were being made by the federal branch. But they just fell short and couldn't address the issues that seemed to be at the core of this conflict. One of the main issues that the State Retort remains silent on is the entire situation that transpired with Mateo, Baby Joker, their improper removal from office, and their justification for going to the extremes of spilling the blood of two C's who were both in good standings. This is something that just can't be swept away. How can you not address this when it's at the very core of everything that created a deeper fracture in this rift? The Constitution was written in the 60s and then has been revised several times over the years in accordance with the collective body's 3/4 majority vote. Whether it was accomplished through the MESA, the IC, or the GC, it was done according to old policy and in accordance to NF law. The state seems to think that they can rewrite the Constitution or that they can implement their own laws as they go, and this is simply not how it's done. Why weren't these things addressed? This will remain a lingering and burning question until they answer it and put forth their reasoning for not only spilling a fellow Familiano's blood, but also why they elected to forfeit and deprive these brothers of their afforded right to due process. Due process is a sacred guaranteed privilege that all C's are afforded, even in the most serious and most gravest of circumstances. Due process is a guaranteed right that remains one of the fundamental benefits all C's are given. This rift started as a disagreement. It eventually snowballed into a split and/or rift. As things began to escalate, it got to the point to where it is now defined as the state faction versus the federal faction. Every ensuing move that now transpires on either side of the board only succeeds in making this division deeper and deeper. There's no question about the fact that the situation that took place with Baby Joker from Watsonville and Mateo from Salinas has now taken this beyond a point of no return. So if this is now considered the breaking point, then why would the state not address the issues involving BJ and Mateo? Why not simply grab the bull by the horns and address the issues that are directly at the heart of this conflict? It makes no sense and only provokes the unavoidable question as to why the state seems to be ignoring the real issues at hand here. In regards to the Fed's claims that Conejo paid Chuco $25,000 to secure Chuco's position and backing, the state claims that this is a baseless allegation and that those making this claim have nothing to validate it. They go on to say that this is all part of the federal leadership's propaganda machine aimed at trying to paint Conejo as an unscrupulous and shady character who is no longer working in the best interest of the O. The state further encourages calling for a full-scale investigation that would place all the organization's main bank expenditures under full and complete scrutiny. The federal faction is obviously past calling for any investigations and will only be content when Conejo's head is served up on a platter. But I honestly believe that Conejo's bluffing, and he knows that this investigation will never take place. Again, the state has deflected and diverted most of the hard questions that they know they cannot answer, and the fact that Mateo or BJ are not even mentioned is proof in itself that they have ulterior motives. The closest they came to touching on this issue is where they said, "Those who fight the hardest or speak the loudest in support of Corny and Skip stand to lose the most when this regime is replaced." So their zealousness is likely tied more to the efforts to retain power than what's actually in the best interest of RO. We will sever them from the dialogue and realign ourselves with all true familianos who genuinely want to see an end to this needless bickering and infighting. Those are unveiled threats, and it comes across as sounding like they're not willing to work with them, but instead would rather work without them. Paradigm Media News will continue to bring you, the viewers, any and all updates we require with respect to this ongoing rift. In fact, we are anticipating something new to come out sometime next week. There's no real way of knowing when this material will come out, but as soon as it does, we will get right on it and release it to you. Like I've said all along from the get-go, I honestly don't have a vested interest in who wins this war or who will eventually prevail. But I do believe that the federal branch will be the last one standing when this all comes to an end. The odds are definitely in their favor, and they have more of an advantage. Conejo can only duck and dodge for so long. He's been a C for over 30 years, but he has too many things working against him. Chuco, on the other hand, is merely on borrowed time. He isn't as savvy or as crafty as some of those who have taken up opposition against him. I believe that Conejo will fall first, and then Chuco will soon follow. He's in this above his head and don't stand a chance going up against seasoned C's like Corny and Skip. One thing's for sure, if either Chuco or Conejo somehow end up catching a federal RICO case, like so many of the other leaders before them, they might as well sign up for the WITSEG program, because federal prison is the last place on the planet I think either one of them would want to go. I hope you've enjoyed this brief synopsis on the split between the federal and state branches of La Nuestra Familia. Stay posted for the Impala Street shootout. It should be released shortly.